Welcome to Newsmakers on CHCH Podcast, where we are joined by notable residents in Hamilton, Halton, and Niagara discussing the issues and topics of the day. I'm your host, Louie Butko, and on today's show, I am very pleased to be joined by MPP for Hamilton Mountain, Monique Taylor. Ms. Taylor was first elected as a member of provincial parliament in 2011 and has been re-elected 3 times since, making her the longest active serving MPP in the city. As a member of the official opposition, she currently serves as the NDP critic for children, community and social services, as well as the deputy opposition whip. A lifelong resident of Hamilton prior to running for office, she spent her career in the hospitality industry and was an assistant to former city councilor Scott Duval. Ms. Taylor, thank you so much for joining me on the inaugural episode of Newsmakers Podcast. Thank you.
So excited to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation, Louie. It's fantastic to have this opportunity just to be able to chat and talk about things that are going on in Hamilton.
Yeah, there seems to be quite a bit going on in Hamilton these days. We're going to get to the issues and problems that are facing Hamiltonians, Ontarians these days. But let's start positive. Our Hamilton Tiger Cats are 6 and 7. They're in a playoff spot. I know you are a dedicated fan. You're an East Hamilton girl. What are your expectations for the Ticats the rest of the season?
We're going all the way, Louie.
All the way.
We are going to do it. I have faith, honestly. The last game when we're coming up against Winnipeg, people are like, oh, it's Winnipeg. I'm like, no, we have faith. We have hope. And they pulled it off, right? They played a great game, and they just needed to work the kinks out. I think we're going to be great, and we still have a good season ahead of us.
There is a big game coming up this weekend against the Argonauts, though.
Yeah,
in Toronto. Okay. The Argos look good.
Well, Hamilton fans look better.
Okay.
And so, we're gonna cheer them on and make sure that they have lots of energy behind them to bring that game back home.
Well said. And the Grey Cup, obviously, you were at the Grey Cup in 2021. But it's going to be bigger this year. Ticats COO Matt Affnick promising bigger and better to get to showcase Hamilton to the rest of Ontario, to get to showcase it to the rest of the country. What are you excited about when November is going to be rolling around and hopefully the Ticats are in it, but regardless, there's going to be a big game played at Tim Hortons Field.
For sure. And you know what? It's a great opportunity for Hamilton to host so many people from across the country. The last Grey Cup was fantastic. I got to meet people from all over the country, literally. Yeah. And we had the best time. It didn't matter whether their team was in or not. It was CFL pride. No. And everybody's wearing their own jerseys and cheering their own, for their own colors, but still just engaged and enjoying Hamilton. So this time we're past COVID, and so it's going to be a big difference, but it's going to be a good week.
All right, let's get into some of the issues of the day. Yesterday, the Minister of Public and Business Services, Khalid Rashid, resigned from his cabinet position and the PC caucus after records showed contradicting accounts of a Las Vegas trip that was investigated by the province's Integrity Commissioner. He's now the second cabinet minister to resign following the release of the IG's report. When you heard the news last night, you saw that another cabinet minister was resigning because of this Greenbelt report. What was your reaction?
Well, first thing, I'm not surprised, right? We know that there's a lot going on behind the scenes that people still don't know about. And that's starting to unfold thanks to the work of the Auditor General and the Integrity Commissioner, and maybe other reports to come. And I want to tell you, New Democrats are the ones, Marit pushed for those reports to be done, thankfully, because now we're seeing it unfold and we're seeing ministers starting to trip over themselves, not telling the entire story to the Integrity Commissioner. That's just every sense of wrong. People deserve the truth. They want the truth, and people are going to keep digging until they get it.
Is this not admitting to wrongdoing? Resign. I mean, from your perspective, if you were to resign from your caucus, that's a big step. I mean, you campaign as with your colors, you campaign with your leader to sit as an independent in Parliament. I mean, it's a big deal, is it not?
It really is. We've seen other members resign and still have not returned to the House. So it'll be interesting to see how he treats this. But nobody resigns just because they feel it's the right thing to do. You know what I mean? Like, these guys aren't playing that game. There's obviously more to this story. He's obviously done wrong. He knows he's done wrong. And he needs to come clean and make sure that the Integrity Commissioner has the entire story so that we can get to the root of what's truly happening with these developers.
I don't think people are going to tune out, but I lightly said, once once the report came out, Doug Ford would have done everything. I feel like he would have done everything he could to just move on from it. That's not what happened. There, like you said, there was an auditor general. There was an integrity report. The thing is, the election is still more than 2 years away. I'm not worried about this. I don't think this is going to go in the background, but how does this issue stay front and center without people tuning it out, without people thinking, that was 2.5 years ago? How does the NDP, how do you keep this issue front and center without people tuning it out?
For sure. Well, I think unless the lands are returned to the Greenbelt, people are going to continue to stay angry. They know that this deal stinks. We've definitely seen corruption, and we can't allow governments to just get away with this. So it's our job to make sure that we continue to tell people that story, and that people actually see what it means to have a government who you can't trust. And we're looking at our healthcare system be privatized right before our eyes. We can't let just one government come in here and change the entire social fabric of our community and what Canada and Ontario stands for. It's tough, but we have to be able to keep doing it, and just being able to have opportunities like this to talk about it and to just really keep the flame lit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We saw the reaction at the Ancaster Fairgrounds just last week, a meeting that was supposed to be held a week earlier, but because of the passion of the community had to be moved to something that could accommodate the crowds. We know Mount Hope, we know Stony Creek, we know that there's a lot of areas in Hamilton, 795 hectares, not a huge amount, but still a significant amount. You mentioned Ms. Stiles introducing a motion this week about just restoring the Greenbelt. But what else what would her plan be for the Greenbelt? What would the NDP's plan be for the Greenbelt if elected?
Well, we would make sure it's returned and protected, right? And let's also remember that what they're trying to cover up in the scheme of all of this is the need for housing, right? And that's what this is supposed to be about in their eyes, and it's not. We're seeing, record numbers of homelessness, people struggling each and every day, people sleeping in their cars. We see tents on every corner in our city. So we need to get back to that story and really focus on making sure that we have enough housing, and we can do that without tearing up the Greenbelt. The Greenbelt, those are sensitive lands. We're seeing flooding in houses that never seen it. Making sure that we have clean water. All of those pieces of land have critical environmental statutes for what we need to survive as a community. So, get away from the Greenbelt, leave that protected land alone, and build within what is our existing boundaries.
Well, to that point, a lot of pushback, especially from the city of Hamilton, has said, well, if you want to develop this land, and Premier Ford has said that you need a plan. If you're buying this land, you need a plan on how you're going to do everything. But we're talking about water treatment plants. We're talking about sidewalks. We're talking about green spaces, parks, roads. How would opening these lands, and I guess it's a rhetorical question to you, but how would opening these lands help people who need a house now?
It's not. It's not. There is nothing about these Greenbelt lands that are going to fix the housing crisis that we have right now. And you're absolutely right. And development charges have been taken away from the city. So how are we going to pay for that? It's going to go on our tax base. The city has already announced a possible 14% increase for next year. How many families does that put at risk again, that are going to be on the street and not knowing where to turn? These are critical times, but critical infrastructure and proper affordable housing has to be the key focus of everything moving forward.
No, well said. Then we mentioned the next provincial election being a little ways away, but Marit Stiles has been on the job just over a year. It feels like a little bit longer, but just over a year. How have you seen her in action in this first year as a leader? What have you seen from Ms. Stiles?
For sure. I see someone who's so natural at talking to people, understanding people's issues, and being able to communicate that back, right? People don't want talking points. They They want someone who actually gets them, who can have a conversation, and have a conversation at their level. I see that coming a lot out of Marit. I see people relating to her, but also very focused, right? Like I said, it was Marit that made sure that the Auditor General was on this, that the Integrity Commissioner was on this, and we've also put forward a motion for the Public Accounts Committee for this to be the first course of action to talk about it. So Marit's doing a great job. She's totally focused, touring the province, making sure she really understands people issues, and we're seeing people relate to her.
Is there a recognizability? I don't want to say issue right now, but I mean, you mentioned she's touring the province. She's obviously been front and center responding as the leader of the official opposition. But is there, I don't want to say an imaging problem right now, but how do you get her out in front of more people? Because, the one thing I've seen is that Doug Ford's approval ratings are low, but the PC's approval ratings remain higher. How do the NDP get elected in 2020?
Yeah. So, I mean, we need people engaged. Right? We just need people to pay attention to what's actually happening in our communities. We know that our schools are not doing well. We have too many kids in classrooms. We have not enough EA supports. So unless it's directly affecting you, so if I'm a parent and I have a kid who needs an EA, I'm thinking about that. People aren't thinking about that. We're looking at mental health and addictions. How many people are struggling? How many families are struggling? People have to be able to tie this back and actually see how government governs and regulates everything that happens in our lives. And I think that's what we're missing. We've watched the number of people who have voted drop year over year over year. People are disengaged. They're like, it's not my problem. I don't want to talk about politics. We have to change that conversation. And I think once we start changing that conversation and connect those dots to how government does affect everything in our lives, people aren't going to vote. And until we get that key of talking to folks and them saying, you know what, I get that, and now I want to vote. I think that's going to be the key, and just really, Marit will just keep doing the work. Yeah. Right.
Well, there's one thing I've noticed about Marit is that she'll look you in the eyes when she's answering the question. Yeah. And some politicians, some notable politicians, don't do that. Yeah. She has a personal, and how do you see that firsthand? I mean, it's one thing with a reporter, she's trying to get a message across. Of course, she's going to do it. But with everyday people, what have you seen from her and the reaction to?
Yep. Instant connection with people. Just at the plowing match last week or the other day, time flies. It was literally this week. You see people engaging with her, and we're in rural Ontario where typically we don't see a lot of engagement for New Democrats in those ridings, and people were really engaged with her, really wanted to talk to her, wanted to get a photo with her, wanted to just shake her hand, right? So it is resonating, but with political climate, the focus is on the bad all the time, so it's harder for the good to always break through. But we're determined, and love wins, right? And
you almost set the next question up perfectly, because yesterday, hundreds of protesters, hundreds of counter-protesters took to the streets across the country, including a few large gatherings both in Hamilton and Burlington. What was your reaction watching the events of yesterday unfold?
Yeah, I'm sad. I'm sad for the kids who are feeling caught in the middle of this. I think that all children need to have a safe space. I feel very emotional just talking about it because there's so much misinformation happening out there that's really, is it about the kids anymore? We're talking about protecting kids. We want to make sure that kids have a safe space. Let's get back to the root of that and stop with all of the misinformation and just protect kids, right? Let a kid be a kid and be comfortable in their own space.
So some of the protesters would argue that that's what they're fighting for, letting kids be kids. I mean, that is, I heard a lot of, I was outside Hamilton City Hall yesterday for a different story, but I saw the passion that this one side was going with. And their argument is, we're trying to protect our kids, that the government needs to keep their hands off the education and let parents parent their children. How would you respond to that?
Today is a different day and age than when we grew up, even ourselves. Their kids have access to information every day. More than we could ever have imagined, right? And so they're getting, where are they getting their information from? And so we need to ensure that the information is correct and that it provides a safe space for all kids, regardless of who they want to be, right? And so I think that is the most important thing, is that, we have to change our education system to ensure that it focuses on today's day and age. It's not the 1950s anymore. No matter how much we'd all like to turn it back and put it back in the bottle, it's not happening. So we have to relate to our children of today's day and age and ensure that that kids are safe.
I mean, to the point of misinformation, I feel like a lot of these parents don't know. Like, I grew up with the internet at 11, right? So I grew up online, and I feel like a lot of parents these days are kind of in that same boat, probably around my age. But I really don't think they get the grasp of what they're doing on social media or Snapchat or all these other things. Like, I mean, it really is. And as someone who, as the critic of social services, I mean, you can see where it can go if a child is not supported or loved for who they are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I also want to, a lot of this started because the premier kind of threw it out there, about doctrinating and stuff at Ford Fest, right? So he created this whole, angst among folks to take, is it to take the heat off of him in the Greenbelt? Let's start another fire so that people are looking in another direction. These are the kind of people that do this stuff, right? So where is all of this coming? Why is it just heightening up now? We're talking about very few kids who need this support in our schools. We're not talking about the entire school system. We're very few kids, but those kids deserve to be safe. They need to be okay with themselves, and they need to be welcomed in a safe community. That's what we're talking about here. What Ford has done by riling this up is not safe. And now we're seeing more people fighting in our communities. We're fighting hate with hate on a regular basis. This is not going to solve the issue, right?
Are you worried American-style politics are either already here or are infiltrating, whether it's groups, or are you worried about that? Does that concern you?
Very much so. And we're seeing that, right? I mean, we've seen a lot of folks who were on the very far right joining up with those concerned parents yesterday, right? The same folks who weren't so friendly to say, they had other issues, right? There was other racism, there was other things, and now they've teamed up with these same people to create another fire, right? And I understand parents' concerns. I truly do. But the most important thing is making sure that kids are educated and that they have the safeguards and the knowledge of how to stay safe, how to not bully others, how to allow people to just be free for who they are.
You mentioned kids. Another passion of yours is autism activism. Something I know that's near and dear to your heart, especially with the portfolio you hold with the NDP. The waiting list. Again, we're talking about fires. I mean, it seemed like where are we? I know people who have children who are autistic who are waiting. And you're talking about kids being in schools. These parents want their kids to be in schools. There's not enough EAs, as you said. Where is this file right now, and where does it go, and how do we get people back? How do you get people back paying attention to it?
Yeah, so that's another thing where the legislature is going to give us the ability to do that. The Ontario Autism Coalition is constantly doing the work, constantly talking to families. They're going to be at Queen's Park. I think I want to say October 17th. It's right around that date to once again protest the government who, when they came into power, I believe we had 24,000 kids on wait lists for autism services. Now we're over 70,000 kids. and we have no capacity in the system. So that means the providers to be able to provide. This government, they defunded our children's medical centers like Ron Joyce in Hamilton to take those autism services away, to privatize it. And so we don't have enough providers. We have the very few people who do have money in their pocket from the autism program, they have nowhere to spend it. They can't find the providers. So it's just a terrible mess, and kids are suffering, right? And families are suffering because autism affects the entire family. My granddaughter is 4.5 on the spectrum. And we had to fight tooth and nail to be able to get her an EA in the classroom, which just started. And, we're hopeful, but she hasn't had a stitch of services either, right? And so, families really struggle with this, and it's difficult. Right? Behaviors can be really tough, especially if families are isolated. We've seen so many families, break up over it, and not be able to cope with the stress, not be able to get measly services like family network services that should be available online. They're waitlisted. I mean, it's an awful mess, and it's this like another file that this government has just created havoc in. So all of these pieces fall together. The people of Ontario cannot forget in 2.5 years what this government has done in the 6 years that they've been there.
We've talked about issues. You talked about problems. You talked about our Tiger Cats. Give me a reason to be optimistic.
Yeah.
Give me a reason to be optimistic.
Yeah, for sure.
For in Hamilton, I mean, I don't want to end this on a downer.
No.
What are you optimistic about?
We have to be optimistic. And you know what I'm most optimistic about is that people are actually standing up. They're standing up and they're speaking out. We're seeing labor unions doing the same thing. The Enough is Enough program, that we want safe workplaces. We want better jobs. We want, better wages. So these are the kinds of things that I know it almost sounds like Debbie Downer again, but it's really not, because people are paying attention, right? And so they're standing up. They're the Greenbelt. Look how many hundreds of people are showing up to save our Greenbelt. To me, in today's day and age, that's as optimistic as I can get, right? And I think that's realistic, because there is a lot of work to do. We can't paint a rosy picture of something, where people are struggling.
The legislature is back next week.
Yeah.
You'll be back at Queen's Park. Give me a temperature gauge of the NDP heading into. How is the caucus feeling? What's the energy like? And getting back to work. How are you feeling?
For sure, we had our caucus retreat in Kitchener last week or the week before, and everything
again
muddles right in time. But everybody's really energized about just really getting back and holding the government to account, working on getting the Greenbelt put back into place. There's so many issues. There's housing issues. There's healthcare.
Is there too many? I mean, are there too many issues? How can you prioritize when there's so much going on?
And is that another strategy of the Ford government, right? There's so many things in every direction that highlighting everything is difficult. But we know that the major things that families are feeling is cost of living, right? 19% increase of food in the last year. Those are the things that we need to stay focused on. And I know my caucus and my team is definitely energized to get back there with that.
Well, you're clearly energized. You managed to stay in this conversation the entire time. I appreciate it. As I mentioned, you are an inaugural guest here on Newsmakers. I had to check because it's so new. I had to check the name of the show, so I had to check behind me here. Newsmakers. You certainly are one. Ms. Taylor, thank you so much for making the time today.
Thank you so much for allowing me this space today and for allowing me to be your inaugural guest. I feel honored.
Well, the longest serving active Hamilton MPP. You are a familiar face. Is that true?
And it's 4 years. It's 4 terms.
4 terms.
Elected.
Oh, I said you were elected once, and I said 3 times since 4.
Oh. Okay, yeah. So I've been elected 4 times.
Oh, you're correct.
4 times in total.
That's the first and last time Monique Taylor's on the show.
4 times in total.
That's what I said.
Which is really exciting.
Absolutely. No problem. Thank you for doing this. Thank you for tuning in and listening. Make sure you subscribe to CHCH Podcast wherever you get your favorite podcasts. If you happen to be watching it, there's a QR code right on your screen. Thank you to the director, Mike Corsten, who put this show together. And thank you once again for listening. I'm Louie Butko for CHCH News.